This is the case of Brian Ruff, a man who was found shot 5 times in the back and found by police buried in a shallow grave. So on December 10th, 1991, around 6:30 p.m., 22-year-old security guard Brian Ruff is sitting inside a tiny freezing guard shack at Connecticut Copper Mine in northern Utah. The shack is barely large enough for one person to sit in, with windows on all four sides staring out into pitch dark. This area of the mine is isolated. No streetlights, no nearby buildings, just an isolated shack under the dim moonlight. Brian hated this guard post. He'd worked at the mine for a little over a year, but this specific assignment was new. His duty was guarding a remote chain link gate leading into the canyons. It was incredibly boring, but at the same time insanely dangerous. You see, Kennecott Copper Mine wasn't just any mine. It was known as the richest hole on earth, full of copper, gold, and silver. Naturally, that made it a prime target for thieves. In recent months, over 150,000 worth of materials had been stolen, and here was Brian, unarmed, completely alone, with no security cameras and nothing but a wired phone to call for help. But tonight was quiet. Brian, who was a nursing student during the day, was using the downtime to study for his final exams. He poured himself a bowl of soup from his thermos cup. Just as he took his first bite, the phone on the desk rang. Brian knew it was likely his wife, Jennifer. Things at home weren't the best right now. Jennifer was a nurse's aide, and even with Brian working nights, money was incredibly tight. To complicate matters, Jennifer was pregnant with their second child. The mounting pressure of work, school, and fatherhood had recently pushed Brian to a breaking point. Just a month prior, he had inexplicably walked out. He quit his job, left a note, and drove all the way to Las Vegas and San Francisco. It took his daughter ending up in the hospital with pneumonia to snap him out of it and bring him back home. And Jennifer took him back, but the tension never really left the house. Anyway, Brian picked up the phone. They spoke to each other for a few minutes. Then suddenly Brian stopped talking. Through the frost-covered window, he saw a flash of lights crawling up the desolate dirt road toward his shack. He told Jennifer he had to go, hung up the phone, and stepped into the freezing darkness. An hour and a half later, around 8 p.m., Brian's supervisor, Todd Fallows, pulls up to the gate. The lights inside of the shack are glaring, but Todd doesn't see Brian anywhere. This immediately sets off alarms. The number one rule of the job is simple: under no circumstances do you leave your post. What's even more unsettling is that Brian's car is still parked right outside. Out here, miles from civilization, you can't exactly go for a walk in the freezing winter night. Todd steps into the tiny shack. There are no signs of struggle, nothing is overturned, but on the desk it's Brian's hat and his half-eaten soup. Todd picks up the phone and calls Salt Lake County Sheriff's Department. Less than an hour later, Detective Manny Lasig arrives to the scene. Because of the recent thefts, his immediate thought is that the thieves possibly kidnapped Brian. He meets Todd, follows him down the winding canyon road to the shack, and begins his inspection. It's snowing heavily outside, erasing any footprints or tire tracks. Inside, Lasig takes note of the eerie stillness, the abandoned soup, the hat on the desk. He's trying to piece together a theory when the shack's phone abruptly rings. Lasig answers. A woman's voice on the other end sounds startled. She introduces herself as Jennifer Ruff, Brian's wife. Lasig breaks the terrifying news that Brian vanished mid-shift. Jennifer is stunned. She says she just spoke to him about half an hour ago. He saw headlights, she tells the detective, and he had to hang up. It's a chilling detail, but it doesn't give Lasig much to go on. He promises to keep her updated and hangs up. Then, a few seconds later, the phone rings again. Lasig picks it up. Once again, a woman's voice comes through the speaker, asking, "Hey, where's Brian?" It's his wife, Jennifer. Lasig freezes. The woman he's speaking to right now sounds entirely different from the woman he spoke to 30 seconds ago. She has no memory of the conversation they literally just had. Two different women, both claiming to be Brian's wife. One of them is lying. Days pass with no sign of Brian. Detective Lasig traces the phone numbers. He confirms the first caller was, in fact, the real Jennifer Ruff, calling from her workplace. But who was the second caller? Lasig sits down with Jennifer. He asks a sensitive question. Was there any chance Brian was having an affair? Jennifer looks down. Yes, she admits. She then slides a phone bill across the table. She points to a recurring unfamiliar number. Lasig immediately recognizes it. It's the exact same phone number that the fake Jennifer used to call the guard shack at the night Brian vanished. That number leads Detective Lasig to a woman named Christy Bradley, and her connection to the case makes Lasig's blood run cold. Christy is married to Dell Bradley. Dell is also a security guard at the very same copper mine where Brian works. Lasig confronts Christy alone before her husband gets home and she breaks down. Yes, she and Brian were having an affair. They were the ones who ran away to Vegas. That night Brian vanished. She had called the shack just to hear his voice. When a cop answered, panic took over. To hide the affair, she instinctively claimed to be Jennifer, but she swears she has no idea where Brian is. Now detective has a prime suspect, Dale Bradley, the fellow guard familiar with the mine who had a motive, revenge against the man sleeping with his wife. Lasig brings Dale into the interrogation room. He immediately lets Dale know about the affair. Dale looks genuinely crushed. He had considered Brian a close friend. When Lasig asks where he was at the night of December 10th, Dell composes himself. He says his red Mustang got stuck in the snow near the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, an hour away from the mine. He even provides the name of a friend who drove out to help him dig his car out. So Lassig checks it out, the friend confirms the story, Dell takes a polygraph test and passes. Lassig searches the red Mustang and finds nothing. Against all odds, Dell and Christy Bradley are crossed off the suspect list. The investigation stalls out. Desperate, Lassig pivots back to the copper mine. Two of Brian's fellow guards had just been arrested for stealing from the mine. It was a massive insider job. Digging through reports, Lassig discovers that Brian was the whistleblower who reported the thefts. Lassig brings this up to Brian's supervisor, Todd Fallows. Did the thieves kill him? Lassig asks. Todd leans back and nods slowly. He tells Lassig that if the corrupt guards killed him, they probably threw his body in the massive gravel concentrators. If he went in there, Todd says grimly, he'd be pulverized into dust or buried under thousands of tons of waste rock. You'll never find him. It was a chilly and highly specific theory, but like everything else in this case, there was no proof. A year and a half passes. July 1993, 50 miles south of Connecticut mine, a group of campers are exploring a remote stretch of desert when they stumble upon a horrifying sight. Human skeletal remains protruding from a shallow grave. Detective Lassig arrives on the scene. The skeleton is covered in dust from head to toe, wearing a dark blue jacket, a security guard's uniform, and in the pocket was a wallet. Inside of that wallet is the ID of Brian Ruff. While forensics process the heavily decomposed remains, Lassig searches the area. A few feet away, he finds 5 used shotgun shells, then a police dog alerts to something nearby. It's a black leather work boot. Right through the tough leather is a clear, distinct bullet hole. Brian wasn't thrown into rock crusher, he was driven out into the desert and sadly ended, but with 18 months of rain, wind, and snow ruining the crime scene, any forensic link to the killer has vanished into the sand. So Lassig knows how Brian died, but he has absolutely no lead to proving who did this to Brian. 12 years go by and it's April 2005. Now Detective Todd Park is working cold cases for Salt Lake City Sheriff's Office. He receives a call from a neighboring county. A woman named Crystal has just been murdered. The detective on the line mentions a strange detail. Crystal is the second wife of the man named Dell Bradley, the same Dell Bradley whose first wife had an affair with Brian Ruff. 2 unalived people connected to Dell Bradley. This could not be a coincidence. Detective Todd Park pulls a decade-old file on Brian Ruff. He reads over every photograph, every lab report, every piece of physical evidence that had sat boxed up for over a decade. And then he spots it, a minuscule microscopic detail that everyone else had missed. On the sole of Brian's black work boot, the one with the bullet hole found near his desert grave, was a tiny, almost invisible speck of red paint. The detective orders a forensic analysis of the paint. He then compares it to the paint from inside of the trunk of a very specific vehicle, Dell Bradley's red Mustang, and it's a perfect match. Suddenly, the entire timeline that detectives knew completely shatters and reforms into a clear, horrifying details. On the night of December 10th, 1991, it wasn't thieves who pulled up to the guard shack, it was Dell Bradley. Dell had found out about his wife's affair. He drove to the isolated shack. When Brian stepped outside to greet the approaching headlights, Dell ambushed him. He bound Brian's hands, shoved him into the trunk of the red Mustang, and sped off. For 50 miles, Brian fought for his life inside of the pitch-black trunk, kicking wildly in sheer terror, his work boot violently scraping against the inside lid, leaving behind that single tiny speck of red paint. Dell drove into the remote desert. He pulled Brian from the trunk, handed him a shovel, and forced him at gunpoint to dig his own grave in the freezing dirt. Brian begged for mercy. He promised he would disappear, but Dell raised his firearm and fired 5 times in the back of Brian Ruff. But here's the most chilling part of the story. When Dell tried to drive away, his red Mustang got stuck. Stranded in the desert, Dell called a friend for help. He told his friend he was stuck out near the university. The friend drove out, completely oblivious to the fact that just a few yards away, a man lay dead in a shallow grave. Ultimately, Dell wasn't immediately caught because he passed the polygraph test, and because police never verified the exact coordinates of where his car was stuck, Dell walked away a free man for 14 years. But in September of 2005, Dell Bradley was finally arrested. In 2007, he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter and kidnapping and was ultimately sentenced to 40 years in prison.